Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans. I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 24 years and was introduced to it during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house without melting down into a puddle of panic, was on disability. My entire life had stopped, and I was fortunate enough to be matched up with a psychologist who, even back then, was several decades deep into practicing and teaching mindfulness and insight meditation. And that was the beginning of my practice and a whole new phase of my life. So I like to share my experience, the things that I've learned from others, things that I've discovered for myself. And as Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. So it's all about helping each other out. So here I am, and thank you for joining me. A really critical aspect of mindfulness, insight meditation, the Buddha's teachings, is concentration, focus. Where are we directing our attention? Are we directing our attention skillfully? What kind of a foundation are we building for ourselves? Are we building one that will allow us to withstand, to endure those things that life brings our way that are hard to face? Can we learn how to bend so we don't snap? So a large part of this practice is building that foundation of concentration, of focus, stability. And this morning's sitting will go through a few techniques that I have found helpful when we are trying to direct the mind, because the mind does not always lend itself to being directed. It likes to direct, right? So we'll go through a few techniques that I have found helpful for enhancing focus and concentration. Okay? We can go ahead and jump in. I always like to begin my sitting by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head. It has a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. If we are experiencing some tension right now, we can allow it to be tension. Whether it's physical tension or mental tension, emotional tension. The natural tendency is to try to just get rid of it. But trying to force away tension is just adding tension to tension. So I like to just notice if there is tension and let it be tension. And let it shift as it will. Let it leave in its own time, whenever that may be. I also like to notice what is in contact with the chair, the cushion, the floor. So I have a sense of grounding, support. Something is holding me up. And I can allow it to do so. Let's take a moment and notice this support, this grounding beneath us. And this suspension from the ceiling at the top. and whatever else happens to be in between the two for us right now. However it is. And if you haven't already, you may begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And you may notice that you begin to shape or control your breathing when you bring your attention to your breathing. It's very difficult not to. Sometimes we think we're supposed to, especially in a meditation practice, right? We need to have a certain kind of breathing, long, deep, and contemplative, right? That's not how I practice. My meditative breath is simply the breath I have while I am meditating. I like to notice the breathing exactly as it is. And as I continue to work with that, sometimes I will find that even when I thought I wasn't controlling or shaping it, I start to notice more and more subtle levels where I actually am. And I just hadn't been able to detect it yet. And I don't fight with that. I don't try to stamp out the new controlling I have discovered. That's just controlling, like adding tension to tension. And just notice it. Shining the light of attention onto it is enough to make it change. Eventually. And in the meantime, it's enough to simply become more familiar with this process that I've just now developed the skill to be able to see. Ironically, when we try to rush a process, we end up holding it up, getting in its way, slowing it down. Now, one of the best ways that we can catch these more and more subtle levels of when we are getting in the way is by developing our focus and our concentration. And two of the techniques that I'll be sharing today both center on how we work with the breathing. The first one is counting the breathing, but counting in a specific way. We count each breath going from 1 to 10, and then starting back at 1 again. But we either do the counts on the in-breath or the out-breath, or the space in between them. And the trick that I have found to really work for me with this technique is I tried different ones, in-breath, out-breath, space in between, and I stick with the one that I find most challenging. I find that I can very naturally count on the in-breath. And because it comes so naturally, so easily, it doesn't really require much focus or concentration. So my mind more easily wanders. I have a much harder time counting on the out-breath. So it requires effort, concentration, continued focus. I invite you to experiment with that for the next couple of minutes. Try the counting on the in-breath, then do a few on the out-breath, a few in the space in between. Notice any differences. Perhaps there are no differences. And then pick one and stick with it. If you lose the count, you just come back and start over again. See what works for you today. What helps steady the mind for you the most today? Sometimes as we're going through a practice like this, we start to notice just how quickly we follow the mind into some thought pattern, storyline, daydream. And we simply notice it and come back and start the count again. The next technique is one we may use by itself or use with the counting. I like to notice the deepest point physically, where I can feel the in-breath reaching. Again, not controlling the breathing, not attempting to make it go anywhere. It's not about how deeply it goes. Much of the time when I am practicing and I am simply observing the breathing, my breathing's quite shallow. It's very much the opposite of what someone might expect a meditative breath to be. So I'm not trying to force it into the stomach or the diaphragm. Sometimes it will reach there on its own, that's fine. But it may only get as far as the chest. Sometimes I will have a sequence of breaths that all seem to reach pretty much the same spot. Very consistent breathing, whether it's long or short or deep or shallow. It'll be that way for a while. Sometimes it will go through a lot of changes very quickly. It's all just in the noticing. It is something to anchor on. Someplace to focus our attention. Oh, where's this one reaching? And then this one. And then this one. And like I say, you may do this by itself, or you may piggyback it on top of the counting. And again, if the mind wanders, and it will, mine does too, we notice that and we start again. Remember, we're building a skill of focus, skillful attention, concentration. It takes practice. So as long as we're practicing, we might as well be patient and compassionate towards ourselves in the process, right? I mean, we don't have to be. We can be impatient. We can berate ourselves. And technically, there's a motivation behind that that's trying to be helpful, because it's trying to make us improve, right? But is it actually helpful? Not in my experience. So we can notice that impatience has arisen. We can notice that there's perhaps a lack of compassion. And we come back. Because that's just another thought and storyline from the mind. Like the one we might have fallen into. That led us to berate ourselves for having fallen into it. So in the course of berating ourselves, we're just falling into another storyline. This is how the cycle happens. That's what we're here to see. That's not getting in the way of the practice. This is the practice. That's what we came to see. So the last technique I'll offer is a little bit different. It is one that works very well for me. I have shared it with other people before. Some people find it extraordinarily unhelpful. So I know that this does not necessarily work for everyone. But I will share it. You may try it. If you find it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, don't use it. So I am very visually oriented. My biggest challenge is lots of mental images come up when I'm practicing. And I'll start chasing those mental images, the thoughts and the storylines that follow. And I found a trick a number of years ago for myself where I realized that even if my eyes are closed, I can still focus them. I can focus on the blackness, the inside of my eyelids. I can actually feel the eye muscles engage. And I discovered that I am unable to focus my eyes. Again, even with them closed, I can't focus my eyes and simultaneously entertain a mental picture. It's like I can engage my physical eyes or my mental eyes, but not both at the same time. So if I bring awareness to my physical visual sense, mental images either don't arise, or if they do arise, have nowhere to latch onto, nowhere to land. And I've found that to be a really powerful technique for myself for maintaining continuous, consistent concentration. And again, I have shown this technique to some people who have said, this makes it worse for them. Actually increases their mental imagery. So I invite you to try this technique and see if it works for you. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, or you find no value in it either way, simply disregard it. And again, just like with the other techniques, sometimes we lose that focus, lose that concentration. We don't really have a choice when that happens. We don't really have a choice when we notice that that has happened. We do have a choice what to do when we notice that has happened. In my experience, and I've done this a lot, it's most helpful to notice it's happened and come back. And if I find that I am berating myself or falling into another storyline about the fact that it has happened, I notice that that is happening. That is also a process. That is also an experience. That is also observable. And I come back. Again and again. That's how we hone our skill. Of concentration, focus, appropriate attention. The whole point of this practice is to alleviate our suffering by getting out of our own way. And how do we do that? By clear seeing. And how do we develop clear seeing? Well, we're going to need some concentration, some focus, some appropriate attention. And this is why we practice. Thank you, everyone. I'll hang on for a few moments and we'll take a look through the chat if anyone has any questions, observations you'd like to share. Yeah, Michelle, lose count on the out-breath. Yeah, definitely find the out-breath is more challenging for me. So it's funny how life works out. The things that are more challenging, of course, bring the most benefit, right? Ren yawning a lot during the practice. Yeah, that can come up for sure. And one thing I'll mention is when I practice and teach, like I mentioned, I do it without controlling the breathing. You don't have to not control the breathing. One of the teachers that I follow most often, that you've heard me quote on here quite a few times, Tanasaru Bhikkhu, he advocates working actively with controlling the breathing in different ways to see what happens. So practicing with uncontrolled breathing is not right per se. It's what I have found helpful for me, particularly as someone with a history of anxiety who spent a lot of time hypervigilantly controlling the breathing because of panic disorder. It was groundbreaking for me and also very uncomfortable, which is, again, difficult and beneficial for me to practice without controlling the breathing. But if you find that working with controlling the breathing in different ways is helpful for you, do it. This is a process of experimentation. Like I said, the eye technique I offered at the end works great for me. The very first person I ever showed it to, I was waiting for him to say, wow, that was amazing. And he was like, afterwards, he was like, yeah, that sucked. It's like, that didn't work at all. It made the mental images come up so much more. And I was like, wow, okay. Well, there you go. We're all having a different experience. So you have to experiment for yourself. I'm offering what works for me. This is what the Buddha did. I mean, the Buddha didn't tell you to do anything. He just said, look, this is what worked for me. You got to try it for yourself. See if it works for you. If you find it doesn't work for you, why the hell would you do it? So I'm offering suggestions. Take them, try them, see what works, use what does, disregard what doesn't, modify for yourself, experiment. Yeah. From Zen about the focusing with your eyes closed. Basically, I find that I can't engage my eyes such that I'm actually focusing on something, even with my eyes closed. And I'm just looking at the blackness. I can't engage my eyes in that way and also hold a mental image. It just doesn't seem to work. As soon as a mental image comes up and I focus on that, my physical eyes are no longer, at a physical level, I'm sure they're registering something, but it's not reaching the brain. I can't look at the blackness consciously and be entertaining this mental image at the same time. It's like one of the things I talk about a lot in this practice is we are focusing on the process of what is arising rather than the content of it. So when we fall into these storylines, these daydreams, it doesn't feel like we're creating them. It doesn't feel like we're writing these storylines, but we are. It feels very natural. It seems to just happen. And a lot of that is simply because we've been engaging in it for so long, we're doing it on autopilot. But we can't bring our attention to the process of the writing of these storylines and be writing them at the same time. Our minds don't multitask. We can go back and forth very, very quickly. It seems like they're multitasking. It's not happening. In the precise moment that we are observing the process of the storyline being generated by us, we can't be getting carried away by it. So that's the experience that I've had with the eye technique, is that I cannot simultaneously focus my eyes physically, even with them closed, and get caught up in a mental image. I just simply cannot hold the two of them simultaneously. So because it is normally mental imagery that will carry me away from my breathing, from my concentration, I rely on that technique quite a bit because it really makes a huge dent in that number one hindrance that I tend to have that keeps me from my continuous concentration. I think I'll wrap it up there. Okay. Always feel free to drop me a line on here if you like. And I hope to see you all again real soon. Cheers, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care.